topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Alise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. Thanks for tuning in this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. If we've not met before and you don't know me, I'm a workforce advisor, organizational psychologist, management consultant, logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by building a dynamic, high-performance culture, inspirational leadership, and nurturing managers activated by meaning and purpose. Many organizations are not aware of how critical it is to invest in developing their leaders and managers, not just for their own effectiveness, but also to avoid burnout and to keep them fulfilled. And did you know that inspired employees outperform their satisfied peers by a factor of 2.25 to 1? In other words, inspiration is good for the bottom line. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or my personal site, alisecortez.com. Getting into today's program, we have with us a dynamic duo. We have Dr. Rich Fernandez, who has dedicated his career to building more purposeful, mindful, and high-performing workplaces. He's an independent practitioner that is stewarding high performance and leadership. And we also have with us Carolina Lasso, who is a purpose mentor and the founder of Plenari, which is a purpose academy dedicated to unlocking your full potential through transformative experiences. Rich and Carolina are two of the authors of The Purpose Reset, how reconnecting to what matters drives fulfillment and success, which we'll be talking about today specifically around the realms of first personal, then team, then organizational. Rich joins us today from San Francisco and Carolina hails from Toronto. Dr. Rich and Carolina, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thank you. Great to be here. Hello.
Really great to be with you. And as we talked about before you got on air, I slightly loved reading your book, The Purpose Reset. I really got so much out of it, took so many copious notes. And I was like, is it time yet? Is it time yet? Let's get them on.
So it is time here.
Okay, good. It's time. Well, for those of you, our audience members who have not read your book yet and haven't really dove into it, let's just briefly situate where you both came from, because you have diverse experiences that brought you into this same transformative purpose space. Could you just briefly each narrate a bit about where you came from and what brought you together to write the book together?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. It's great to be here, by the way, Dr. Alise, and lovely to be with your audience. And this is a topic that I have been pretty much living my entire life and still do. It's consistent with how we see purpose, which is that it's an ongoing process. And that ongoing process of aligning oneself with what's most important, which we'll talk about more, has been something that's been true for my whole career. I studied and I got a PhD in psychology, but eventually went into industry pretty quickly after the PhD and worked in banking. And then I went over to the technology sector as a psychologist in leadership and learning and organization development. And always I noticed that people and organizations, as well as leaders within those organizations who knew what their purpose was and how it aligned with the purpose of the organization, always outperformed. So it became an enduring question for me. I eventually wound up at Google, which is something Carolina and I have in common. We both worked at Google. I was head of executive education. So I really had a front seat view to leadership and how they were carrying out purpose and its impact on the world. Eventually, I left Google and I went to run Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, which is a nonprofit that spun out of Google and taught some of Google's leadership curriculum around emotional intelligence. So all of that weaves into this book, The Purpose Reset. Carolina and I worked at SIY together, and that's how we started talking about this book. hand it over to you, Carolina.
Yeah, so some similar paths, but I think what's really common between Rich and I, and also with the other colleague who co-authored the book with us, Steph Stern, is this ongoing desire for more meaning and fulfillment. So in terms of my story, I immigrated from Colombia and I was doing all the things that I thought I needed to do to be happy, right? So checking all of the boxes and striving and working really hard and, graduated valedictorian, then commencement speaker in college. Then I got a scholarship to go to college, and then got jobs first in financial services in New York City, in media and entertainment in Washington, D.C. And then I started working at Google, and I was there for 7 years, and all throughout really trying so hard. And then at a certain moment, I paused and I said, wait a second. Is this what life is all about? And is this my path? Is this my purpose? And so asking myself the big questions, I realized I wanted to do something that was better aligned with my values and the impact I wanted to have in the world, and something that felt closer, more fulfilling, something more meaningful. And that's when I found Rich and the rest of the team and ended up quitting Google to join the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, and finding that connection between my work and the impact I wanted to have by providing these tools on emotional intelligence and mindfulness and resilience to organizations. And eventually I also left, and now I decided to go all in the topic of purpose. And so I founded my own Purpose Academy, and I am a purpose mentor. So all things purpose. And so one day we were talking about different things, and our colleague, Steph, talked about this idea of moving from ladder to love.
I love that part of the book. Yes.
Yeah, she wrote it down in a napkin and she showed it to us. I think it was her last day in our organization, and she showed it to us. And I was like, oh my gosh, there is something here. Let's talk about it. And we ended up developing the framework that became then the book. And so we're so happy that you have it in your hands right now and that so many people get to read it.
We are really 3 peas in a pod, the 3 of us. Well, Steph too, 4 peas in a pod.
Yes.
So I want to get through as much as I can, because listeners and viewers, there's so much they wrote that is so actionable for you. So in the first segment, we're talking about how to apply this stuff on a personal level. So let's quickly talk about your definition of purpose, and then let's talk about how to unpack it just very briefly. But your definition is purpose is the ongoing process of understanding and connecting strengths, values, and desired impact with aligned actions to unlock your full potential and be of service. So let's talk about those components a little bit more deeply so that we can present them for our listeners and viewers, if we could.
Yeah, maybe we should take it in parts, right? So, because the definition has a few different key things to it.
Yep.
The very first one is that it's an ongoing process. So purpose is a verb. It's not a noun. It's something that's alive and living. And you have to always kind of nurture it, just like a living thing. You always have to be aware of it. You always have to tune to it. And so that is the very first part, to understand it as an ongoing process, not as a commodity that you could pull off the shelf and all of a sudden I have purpose and I'm done. It's an ongoing life work. Then the second part, Carolina, I don't know, I'll kick it over to you. Strengths, values.
Yeah, so we start there, right? And then it's the light that illuminates the path on 2 key aspects based on our research. One is awareness, becoming aware of everything within you, your preferences, your strengths, your interests, your values, right? So awareness. And the second one is aligned action, because you can be aware about a lot of different things, but if you don't take action, you won't have the opportunity to receive real-time feedback and really continue to align within that path, within that journey. So it's a journey, not a destination, and it's the combination of awareness and aligned action. And we close with the part that it's all about service. We cannot talk about purpose without service.
Yeah. I remember some years ago when I was speaking at a conference, and the speaker in front of me belted out across the stage. She said, "My purpose is to double my income." And I just cringed. I was like, that is not purpose. That's just a really fantastic goal. Don't, conflate these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Because also it comes from an internal place. We talked about strengths, and values and desired impact. And we all have strengths. We all have values, and we all want to have some sort of impact, even if it's small, if it's close, if it's out there in the world. We all have that. And so it's important to bring that forward, and you add all that together, and it equals service. You serve someone. Everybody serves someone. And so our thing that Carolina was saying about awareness and intentionality, be intentional about, what strengths you want to bring and who you might wish to serve.
And I completely align with, there's really nothing in your book that I didn't completely align with. And I also wanted to situate for our listeners and viewers, when you think about, what is work engagement? From a personal level, maybe it's not obvious to you, but really when we talk about being engaged in your work as an individual, what you say in your book is it's being involved, enthusiastic, having a dedication to it, having a deeper emotional connection to your work that is characterized by a higher level of energy, focus, intrinsic motivation. You're not just passively completing tasks, you're actively invested in the work and its end result. And when you situate that, listeners and viewers, imagine, have you felt like that? Are you in a job like that? Maybe, maybe not. Well, actually, if you live in the United States, the chances that you are in that kind of a place are about 30%.
Mm-hmm.
And if more likely that 70% that you're not in that place, according to Gallup's research.
That's right.
True. Or that you may be within that right now, but you can probably relate to not being engaged, that feeling of emptiness, lack of fulfillment, lack of motivation, that sensation that what you're doing is either not aligned with your values, your interests, your strengths, or the impact that you want to have in the world. And it has to deal with intrinsic motivation, right? So that which comes from within, not necessarily the external rewards.
The best kind. So powerful. Now we have got to situate your full model here of the what, why, and who. And I will tell you, I've already passed this on to a couple of people to help them along their path, including my daughter.
That's so meaningful.
Yeah, I told him this is, this week's podcast guest, and this is what they're up to. I think this will help you. So let's do this. I would love for us to talk about the 4 questions that are under each of these buckets, however you want to do this, because this is so powerful. Carolina and Rich, which one of you wants to take this?
Well, Carolina, if you maybe share a little bit about those questions, because what I would like to do is share an example from my own experience, my own working experience, once we talk about what those are.
Okay.
I love that. Sounds great. So our framework is at the intersection, we believe that the purpose reset is at the intersection of 3 key elements: the what, the why, and the who. What, why, and who, right? So under what we're talking about here is, what are your top strengths and skills? What are your interests? When do you find yourself in a state of flow, right? That timelessness, that sense of being completely immersed in an activity. And what activities bring you into that state of fulfillment where you're having the impact you want. So it's the what, it's the awareness of those aspects of your what. A little bit of a SWOT analysis for your own life. That's the what. Okay. So let's hear an example on that, Rich.
So I will use the example of earlier in my career. I used to work at eBay, and I used to think, what do I have? I'm a psychologist. What do I have to offer an e-commerce company working with its leaders? I was running learning and organization development, and I realized I can really facilitate the growth of leaders and their conversations with each other so that they can ensure that the platform is working optimally, which we'll get to my who later, but let me just pause there and say I was able to use my strengths in facilitating growth of leaders, leadership development, to help them have eBay be as successful as it could be. That was my what.
Love it.
Yes. And sometimes we know other people's strengths and values and interests better than we know our own. So once again, it goes back to that awareness, that sense of depth about self-knowledge, self-awareness. The second one is why, the big why, right? So what moves me? Why do I care about this and not that? What are my values? What do I stand up for? What gives me that sense of meaning? Once again, intrinsic motivation, that which really moves me. The why do I want to wake up and go and strive for something, work for something, fight for something? What are the causes that move me? What legacy do I want to leave behind? So that's your big why, that catalyst for action.
And so what that looked like for me when I worked at eBay was that I realized I wanted to be a force for good. I knew that I wanted to apply my skills in service to people and to the world to make it a better place, basically, to the extent I can, to the little drop that I could. And I realized it was working at eBay for me, enabling a force for good. And when I got there and I went to my first seller conference, I realized that the majority of people who operate the platform are people who are running family-run businesses out of their garages, shipping. This was the early days of eBay, shipping stuff out to the world and making a living doing it and getting people stuff like that they maybe couldn't get elsewhere. And so I realized that there was an economic force for good. It was giving opportunity to a broad array of people. It was a force for good. So it aligned with my values, my why.
That depth of alignment, amazing. And then the last category, so again, we talked about the what and the why, and the last one is the who. And here we want to offer a combination of two different types of people or two different audiences. The first one is, who do you want to serve? Going back to the idea that purpose is all about service, then who is on the other side of that equation? Who do you want to support, help, walk this path of purpose with? The other one is, who do you admire, right? Is there someone who perhaps has walked this path before that you look up to, that you would want to follow their footsteps? I always tend to recommend to people to analyze their Instagram, like, who do you follow? Who do you admire? What's there? Are there any common trends or patterns or characteristics of the people you admire and look up to? And the last one is, who do you want to become? So it's not necessarily about the doing, but this is about being. Who do I want to become? What kind of person? And so that combination of the who do you want to serve? Who do you look up to? Who do you want to kind of follow their footsteps? And who do you want to become?
Perfect.
Anything you wanted to add to that, Rich, for your own experience?
Just to round it out, yeah, that eBay experience, the who was, the mission was to create economic opportunity for all. And so, that's who I wanted to serve, and who I wanted to become in doing that was, again, like that catalyst, somebody who can help the people who had the technical skills to enable that in the world. So I really was at eBay. I had this experience of being energized, engaged, focused, for the 4 years or so that I was there. It felt like I was living my purpose was very alive, let's put it that way, because of the who, what, and why I served at that company with its purpose as an organization, aligned with my purpose personally.
And this is so powerful. This is going to help our listeners and viewers, I think, really get better connected, because otherwise purpose is so abstract for a lot of people. So this is amazing. Let's let our listeners and viewers just reflect on what you've just shared here, because it's powerful. And we'll take our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We've been on the air with Dr. Rich Fernandez, who is an independent practitioner of high performance and leadership coaching. And we also have with us Carolina Lasso, who is a purpose mentor and the founder of Plenari. We've been talking a bit about how we can start to really apply how to bring purpose into our personal lives. Now, after the break, we're going to talk about how to create it and live it in our teams. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, as I too am dedicated to helping create a world where organizations thrive because their people thrive. They're led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. I keep researching and writing my own books. So one of my latest is called The Great Revitalization: How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote it to help leaders understand today's very diverse and discerning workforce and what they want and need from you, and then offer 22 best practices to help equip you to provide that for them in your culture and in your environment. You can find my books on Amazon or at my personal site, alisecortez.com. If you are just now joining us, my guests are Dr. Rich Fernandez and Carolina Lasso. They are co-authors of The Purpose Reset: How Reconnecting to What Matters Most Drives Fulfillment and Success. So for this next part, we're focused on the team element here. But before we do that, I think it's incredibly helpful for us to talk about that beautiful framework that you situated, that visual that really shows the beneficial ripple effects of purpose alignment across the three levels of organization, team, and personal. If one of you could situate that for us.
Yeah, for sure. So the cover of our book, if you noticed, has some ripples. And so that it is a subtle symbol for us to indicate the importance and the amplifying, the multiplier effect of purpose. So starting with the individual, when you're feeling aligned with your purpose and with that of your team and that of your organization, then you start feeling more inspired, more motivated, more engaged. And we talked about the importance of engagement. At the team level, then you feel like you belong, that you can collaborate more easily, that you can commit and be accountable for your work. And then you begin to connect at a deeper level with your organization, to be an advocate for the mission, the big vision of that organization. And then you end up having this sense of pride. I am proud to work at an organization and within my team based on what we do, the impact we have, and the way we work together. So that's the visual we have and how it takes you from individual to team to organization. And then I think we can all feel it in our bodies, right? Like we know when we're proud of something, we're proud of being part of a movement, a company, a culture. And I think we also know when we're not that proud, when we're not that inspired by the work we do.
I just think that is so crisp and tight. I really applaud how you've created that. It's just, and it captures so much of what I have certainly understood internally over all these years of investigating and working with purpose too. But that is just tight. And the listeners and viewers, if you, whatever level you're looking at this, as an individual, as a team member, or if you are a leader or an owner of an organization, just think about what you could do with your organization if you were aligned like this. So I want to read something from your book. I love reading from my guest books, especially when there's some really powerful, punchy sentences, and I'll let you comment on it. But you say, when a sense of purpose is at the core of your job, meaning that engagement becomes the force that transforms routine into meaningful actions, duty into dedication, and indifference into commitment. It's the invigorating pull. This is great. The invigorating pull that invites someone to lean in, explore, learn, and innovate, create, collaborate, and care about their work out of a true desire to be of service. That is so beautiful. Imagine, ladies and gents, if you went to work with that wind in your sails. Wow.
Yeah. And you know what's even better is that doesn't happen alone, because now here we're talking about team purpose. And so all of that takes place in the quote unquote home that is the team that you are on in an organization. And so another way to say it is that the team is the functional unit of purpose in the organization. The team is the functional purpose of unit in the organization, meaning that is where you as an individual come to join your efforts with those of others on a daily basis, and then align with that greater mission of the larger organization, which then affects the world. So in the team purpose model, the beauty of it is we like to say 1 + 1 = 3.
I love that. Yes. Yeah, I love that. And I also appreciate a couple things that I thought that were so important to bring out here, especially since I've had guests on talking about the importance of belonging. But you even go so far as to say that belonging to a team, especially if you're up to things like that together, can be a big source of purpose.
For sure. And not only is it motivating for the participants, the team members of, let's say, that intact team, but it also becomes magnetic. And
Yeah.
we've seen that, right? And so you start attracting, whether it's clients or partners or other teams within the organization, you start becoming magnetic because you have
Right.
that clarity of vision, that clarity of meaning, and that extra energy, right? We talk about that invigorating energy that you truly care about what you do. And so that grows the community, grows the, I like to call it movement, right? It becomes a movement when you have that sense of purpose.
Yeah, belonging really unlocks psychological safety and trust.
Right.
And so that's we often teach this model at Search Inside Yourself called the BITS model, which is belonging leads to inclusion, which leads to trust, which leads to an overall feeling of safety. I trust you. I feel safe here. I can bring my best ideas. I can experiment. I could fail and learn. And basically, that's the formula for innovation. So, and the very first component of it is belonging, and it happens in teams, and you can weave it into your teams intentionally as part of the team's purpose. So that's why it's in the book.
And Rich, do you remember while we were at Google, there was this big study done by the People Ops team. So People Ops is the HR, the name of the HR team within Google. And they did this research called Project Aristotle. Maybe some people have heard about it, where they analyzed about 250 teams within Google with this magnifying glass, trying to understand what are the drivers of high-performing teams? What are the drivers of those teams that really hit it out of the stadium? And what they found was that indeed that psychological safety was at the top, but then in addition to that, other drivers included impact, having clarity on the type of impact you're having, which is linked to meaning, and also clarity and structure, right? So when you have purpose, you have that sense of direction, clarity, and then also the impact, the meaning side. So that really can catalyze and elevate teams working together.
And listeners and viewers, if you are not finding this hopelessly yummy, I don't know what to do. This is just so good. Okay, so the next thing I want to do and go to, this is so important to situate for our listeners and viewers, whether you are a team member yourself or whether you're a leader, is this notion of your team's purpose directly connecting the dots between your daily task and that bigger picture. We all three of us know how many individuals feel like they just can't see how their work connects to the bigger whole, and therefore it's not motivating, it's not meaningful. They can't see how it's connected. So if one of you could speak to the notion of how when we work through team purpose, we can see that, we can connect that, we can be fortified by that bigger vision that we're going for.
Yeah, I like to call it line of sight. It's a pretty common expression that maybe a lot of people have heard about, but like the team has a line of sight to the organization's priorities. And therefore, through the team, can you also learn about your line of sight and how it works through and on the team to deliver some of the organization's purpose? And so, like, if you're ever wondering, like, what am I doing here? What are we even doing in this organization? Like, really, the team is the place where a lot of that gets sorted out. And that's why belonging to a team and harnessing the team's power to be able to connect the dots, as we like to say, is really critically important.
And I'll just add
go ahead,
to that.
and then I'll add some.
Yeah, if I may, I'll just add that it also has to do with the story we tell ourselves, right? And so if I'm working within an organization and I just say, oh, I'm just doing this little part, I'm coding this 10 lines of code, and that's all I'm doing, that story you're telling yourself is very different than if you say, through the code that I am writing, I am creating a brand new software to help students in 10 different countries around the world, right? Like, what's that story? And I think purpose and linking from the individual to the team to the organization to that big mission, that gives you that significance, that transcendence, that sense of meaning that is so important in motivating you day to day.
Indeed. Oh, so much so. And this conversation reminds me, I don't remember, it was a few years ago that I had Marcus Buckingham on the podcast talking about his book that he co-wrote, with Ashley Goodwill, I forget his last name. It's called The 9 Lies About Work. But what part of what they were situating in that book was people don't join companies as much as they join teams. And for the same reason, they might leave a team. They also might leave a manager. But in other words, the power, the profundity of a well-focused team is, we just can't understate that. And then to go on to illustrate that further is one of the other things you talk about in your book is you say purpose aligns team members toward a common goal, which fosters what a concept: clarity, effective decision-making, and collaboration. We know where we're supposed to row the boat. We don't actually need somebody here immediately every day in and day out to be able to show us, because we know together what our purpose is in alignment with the organization. That is so powerful when you think about how that directs team efforts, how it directs effectiveness, high performance. All of us are interested in high performance.
Yes.
So comment on that?
Absolutely. And, I said this earlier, but it's because the team is something like your home in the organization, right?
Yeah.
And so the qualitative experience you have on your team, the feeling of it, the connection that you sense there, the relationships that you have on the team brings all of that, the alignment, the priorities, your specific role, the team's deliverables. It brings it all alive, but at a very human level. And so it's where you can go to sort of say, this is hard. Or like, what should I do now? Or I have this great idea. What do you all think of this? That's the place to go, kind of like gathering around a dinner table, right? But like instead of at home, and you might not be having a meal always at work, but like you're gathering to be able to have that experience in the ideal way that a team would work. If a team is really creating that sense of belonging and that sense of purpose, it's the home that allows you to align.
But what's interesting is that completely agree with you, Rich, there. And teams are not doing it. It's very rare to find a team, an intact team, that actually has an explicit, a written purpose statement. We have it for organizations, right? And sometimes it's just like copy on a website that's forgotten. So we'll talk about that next. But for teams, it's kind of rare to sit down and say, why do we exist as a team?
Yeah.
What are we supposed to be doing? What's our purpose? What are our deliverables? And oftentimes it's just linked to outcomes from the business, but not the bigger purpose. And so one of the invitations we have in the book is for teams to sit down and together go create a purpose statement.
That is a perfect way to send us on to our break so our listeners and viewers can kind of contemplate that and noodle that over. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We're on the air with Dr. Rich Fernandez, who is an independent practitioner of high performance and leadership coaching. We also have Carolina Lasso, who is a purpose mentor and the founder of Planari. We've been talking about their book, The Purpose Reset. So we've been talking specifically about how to apply this in teams. In this segment, after the break, we're going to talk about how to bring it into the organizational overall level. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. As you know by now, my program is dedicated to empowering and inspiring you along your journey to realize more of your potential. If you want to learn more about how we can work together and learn about the Gusto Now Academy for leaders and individuals on various journeys alike, make your way to gusto-now.com and then navigate to the training tab to find the Academy. Love to have you join us. If you are just joining us, my guests are Dr. Rich Fernandez and Carolina Lasso. They are co-authors of The Purpose Reset, How Reconnecting to What Matters Most Drives Fulfillment and Success. So for this last segment, we will focus on the organizational level here. And I just wanted to situate to start here. I mean, I just think there's so many incredibly compelling ROI reasons, and whether you're the CFO or whatever, this stuff ought to speak to you. But let's talk about some of the reasons, the economic factors that validate the importance of a purpose reset for business. There's at least 3 that you talk about in as the chapters go on. Could you talk about those?
Mm-hmm. Well, from an economic perspective, we know that the outcomes for businesses or organizations are much better when employees feel that they're connected to the organization's purpose. Employees are 79% more motivated and 33% less likely to leave, for example, according to some of the research. And then there's also the fact that innovation is often unlocked at a much higher level when employees feel that they're connected to the purpose. So it makes good business sense, just from a pure numbers perspective, to have clarity on what the organization's purpose is and make it such that it is very alive for the people who are in the organization.
And it makes sense, right? Because when you truly care about your impact, when you truly care about that which you're creating and your team, and there is that sense of belonging we were just talking about, you're more likely to innovate. You're more likely to just express your creativity, that sense of creating something new. You are more engaged, as we talked about, and you collaborate better, right? So there is that sense of direction, clarity, collaboration, belonging, innovation, risk-taking, and resilience. There is a very strong link between purpose and resilience, because of course, when you care about something, you're more likely to stand up again after an obstacle, to try again, to just have that determination to keep on trying despite any setbacks along the path. So it makes sense that organizations have greater return, have better economics just from that angle alone. But you know what? It also makes sense from a human perspective, because we want to have our employees, our team members feel seen, feel heard. We want their strengths to be well utilized. We want alignment with their values. We want them to care and enjoy what they're doing. So it makes sense from so many different perspectives.
Mm-hmm. And there's one more thing that you talk about in your book that I completely align with as well when it comes to the economic benefits of really operating from purpose, and that speaks to the idea of service. So when the team members are really so aware and they're living the purpose of the organization, they want to better serve whoever the customer is, and that's where we see a lot of innovation happen, because they're so riveted and so understand and care about that customer because they feel cared for. That's also where we see the innovation. And I want to really celebrate that, because, we all talk about emotional intelligence and such. But I think that gets overlooked when we talk about why innovation can be so organic. It's partly a result of being so riveted on being of service.
Yeah, exactly. It's a motivating and innovating factor in the organization, because you are having an impact that is connected with your core strengths and the things you have to offer to the world. I was reading a fun book called Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, and she talks about creative living as offering your internal gifts outwardly in the world. And having a clear purpose unlocks that capacity for yourself to be a channel for what you want to offer through your organization to impact the world.
Sounds great to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Carolina, you mentioned something earlier about having, purpose statements, purpose, mission, vision, value statements, and how for a lot of organizations, they might be situated somewhere on a wall that somebody would try to go and, go read from, but it's not in their hearts, or it's on the website someplace. And I know this too, because it's part of the work that I do. And so there is a disconnect, between how an organization is actually living that versus how it's dictated on the wall. And there's an opportunity there to be able to align those things. So let's just talk a little bit about how important it is to really understand purpose, mission, vision, values, and align that with the way that organizations actually live it, and what happens when they don't.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so I can begin with that. And as you say, oftentimes it's something that one team comes up with, right? So someone come up with our mission and vision statements and our purpose statements. And so a subgroup creates them, and as you're saying, they post them on a wall. But now that we're in a more hybrid, more remote environment, people might not even see that. New employees get onboarded to the organization, and that may be part or not of the onboarding process. And if it is, it's just like, read this thing, read this one pager kind of thing.
Yeah, initial that you've read it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, initial that you've read it, that you understand kind of thing. Or it's on the website, but it's the one page that never gets updated or reviewed. And it is so important because words matter so much. It is so important to make sure that is indeed what you're aiming for, what you're working toward. 2, that it's clear. May I just say that some vision and mission statements are so convoluted and like, what do you truly mean by this, right? So unclear. So they need to be clear, and they need to be lived, most importantly. If they just sit on a piece of paper, then what's the point? You need to feel them in your bones. You need to really care about them. They need to be inspiring, motivating, aspirational, and yet pointing the road that you're following. So they also need to be realistic and relevant to what you're doing. So it's really, really important to go back and revisit it and to make sure that everybody has clarity on it. I think in the book, I talk about an example of a team that I was a part of, and the vice president, so our team lead, decided to print beautiful cards with a purpose statement.
Yes.
Yeah, she called it, my VP called it our North Star. And so each person had, when we were all on our desks in the office, each person had by their desk this piece of paper, and it said, this is our North Star. And so every time you are questioning, like, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing? Is this something I should prioritize? You just go back and look at it and read it, and it should be filled. And of course, that's just one example of something tactical that could be done. But I think here we can be very creative in the ways to bring to life those purpose statements to make sure they are really integrated in everything that we do. Otherwise, people can go into a purpose drift. And I'll let Rich talk about that.
Yeah, and I'll give some examples, because it really comes, the other thing that I want to share is that it comes down to what Aristotle, way back in ancient Greece, in his first book on physics called First Principles. So purpose is a first principle. We have this in the book, meaning the core or foundational concept upon which every other concept is built. That's what a first principle is. And purpose for an organization is a first principle, right? And so let me give you an example, like a great example of, and I like to give example and non-example, as I like to call it, right? So like at one point in time, Boeing was known for engineering excellence. That was its purpose in the world, to deliver engineering excellence. Somewhere along the way, it experienced what we call a purpose drift, which is it got away from its first principles. It got away from that concept of engineering excellence is what we are based on. It happened around the time of their merger with McDonnell Douglas, which was focused very much on cost cutting and efficiency. Right. So that became a priority. As a result of that, for example, the headquarters moved from Seattle to the Chicago area, but manufacturing and production was still in Seattle, and they were disconnected, and quality assurance fell off. And we know what's happened. Numerous accidents all the way through this very year, but also previous years with Lion Air and Ethiopia and airlines that were Boeing planes, because quality suffered. Here in the United States, a window blew out on an Alaska flight, right? Boeing plane, because they lost sight of their first principles. But a good example of a purpose reset that draws on the first principle of purpose is CVS Caremark, right? Where they, at a certain point, decided to stop selling tobacco products. That cost them $2 billion a year in revenue. But what they understood was, because they were there, their first principles were the health and well-being of people. They decided that was inconsistent with it. They weren't going to drift from their purpose. And instead, they were going to double down and provide consultation services through their pharmacies, and eventually work with insurance companies to the point where they acquired one, which was Aetna. And they actually drastically increased their revenue, since taking that move. So in a certain way, making a decision to forego some revenue, to stay true to your first principles and your purpose, actually clarified their focus and helped them expand. So they had to decide to stop doing something in order to remain on purpose and true to their first principles. So two good examples out there of organizations that really tried to keep purpose alive. Remember way back in the beginning of this conversation, it's an ongoing process. Oh, we've been selling tobacco products. Is that consistent with our purpose? Are we still delivering engineering excellence? Wasn't that our original purpose, right? So the ongoing process of building that awareness and then aligning your actions to deliver it. That's how we've always defined purpose as a verb.
That's so excellent to bring that home, Rich. I want to see if we can get in two more things really quick because we're close to time here. I do want to situate the importance of also enrolling external stakeholders in this whole purpose quest. And that means, your customers, your investors, regulators, anybody who can influence the success or failure of the organization. I do something called, purpose visioneering to bring those parties together to be able to line over that. But I think a lot of organizations are not considering those other parties when it comes to their purpose process. If you could just speak very briefly to that, and then I have one more question before we go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you think about a brand's purpose, that's actually a beautiful process for a brand to understand what it stands for and how does that have an impact on all of those external stakeholders. So a big one that we can highlight right now is customers, consumers. People buy the brand because of the impact it's going to have on the planet, on the world, societies, not just for the product or service itself, right? And we've seen so many examples of that. We talk about many examples of that in the book. And so just the importance of really understanding that people will vote with their dollars,
Yes, their
whether
feet
or not,
or their pocketbooks,
or their feet, exactly,
and whether
or not
pocketbooks, yeah.
you're aligned with a purpose that feels right to people. And I think that's growing with new generations.
I find that really so exciting. I feel like it's just so civilized and it's so conscionable and such. The last question I want to get to here is I want to situate, because if people are listening to this are like, yeah, this sounds really, really great, and it's not my job. And I can't do anything about that. And guess what it is? And you can. And so I really like how you talk about a purpose reset for an organization can involve any role, whether you're a leader or a founder, whether you're part of the people or culture teams, whether you're an employee, whether you're a customer. I think that is so empowering. If you could just briefly speak to that.
It goes to things like perception and narrative, and what do you tell yourself and how do you understand your role, right? Love that story about, like, they were asking, someone was like taking a tour of NASA and they were asking in Jenner, what do you do around here? And he basically said, I help put people on the moon. And so, like, really seeing that through line, that connectivity throughout is what will keep that purpose alive on an ongoing basis.
So we've come close to the end here. I want to give you both a chance to say close and say like 30 seconds each here. You know that the show is listened to by people around the world who are interested in either trying to become part of an organization that is doing what we're talking about here. They're trying to become better leaders, versions of themselves, or they're just trying to step onto this purpose path individually. What would you each like to leave them with?
All right.
I can start with, first of all, you deserve to live a life of meaning and purpose. It's not just for a few lucky ones. Every single person deserves that. Number one. Number two, purpose is not just about work. Meaning is not just about work. And even though, of course, this conversation focuses on that, there are so many sources of meaning and fulfillment out there. Go out and seek them. Go out and live them. And three, take action, because the only way you're going to get that immediate feedback on whether something feels aligned or not is by doing it, by taking action. So keep on going on your purpose path. You're already walking it.
Mm-hmm. And my encouragement would be to know that purpose is a practice, and whatever you practice grows stronger. So there are ways you can practice developing clarity about purpose and aligning your everyday actions and behaviors towards that awareness. And in that way, you practice purpose, and keep practicing it throughout your lifetime, throughout your working career and beyond, because that's what keeps it alive and strengthens it. Purpose as a practice.
I am so delighted to know both of you, to have learned from you, to be inspired by you. And now, guess what? You're stuck with me. You can't get away from me. So thank you, Carolina. Thank you, Rich, for being on Working in Purpose, sharing your beautiful work, your hearts and your souls. So good to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thanks.
Absolutely. And devouring your book. I loved it. Listeners and viewers, you are going to want to be connected to both of these people. I would tell you to first start by going to LinkedIn and finding them both. You have Carolina Lasso, so Carolina. Lasso is Lasso. And you have Rich Fernandez, Rich, and then Fernandez, Fernandez. You can also find more about the book on Carolina's website, which is carolinalasso.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on here with Professor Thaddeus Metz talking about the decades-long work he's had investing in meaning in life and meaning in work research. It was very chewy conversation that helps really explain why meaning is so important to people's lives for fulfillment, performance, and vitality. Next week, we'll be on air with the beautiful African women duo of Funke Michaels and Absa Ning. We'll be talking about their book, Modern Leadership Inspired by Mother Nature. The book is one part a call for women to help and support and champion one another across life, and one part a delightful deep dive into how 10 different animals can give us insight into being better leaders, starting with the bee, to the ant, to the owl, and the octopus, to name just a few. It is a very fresh take on how we humans can be enlarged and more effective by immersing ourselves in the wisdom of nature. See you then, and remember that work is one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave, and can give us the opportunity to do business in a way that betters the world. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.